They laughed. My own parents. My mother covered her mouth like it was a tasteful inside joke. My father shook his head in mock pity. $10, he whispered loudly enough for the entire conference room to hear. Heat rose up my neck as my name settled over the table like an afterthought. To Dana Harper, $10. I didn't look at my family. I focused on the glass wall catching the late morning light and pretended the floor didn't tilt. The Harpers were a dynasty that liked its rules ironed sharp and its emotions polished down to nothing. My grandfather Walter had built a manufacturing empire from a garage that smelled like oil and metal filings, and my parents had inherited the empire the way other people inherited wedding china. In our house, the color of Christmas paper had a policy memo. Every dinner felt like a quarterly review. Lucas, my older brother, learned to shake hands like a CEO before he learned long division. I learned to slide sideways through rooms quiet and invisible so nobody would notice when I drifted toward the windows with a sketchbook in my lap. By 13, I had saved for a second-hand film camera with a cracked body and a stubborn light meter. I took pictures of rusted fences, gum-tagged curbs, the backs of bus seats with torn fabric like healed scars. When I showed my mother a print, I loved slanting sunlight across the laces of an abandoned playground swing. She said I looked tired and should drink more water. My father didn't lift the photo from the table. He simply shifted a manila folder over it as if he hadn't seen it at all. The divide felt permanent by high school. Lucas put on suits for mock trials and practiced the family voice, steady, affable executive. I took photos of the cafeteria dishwashers and the kid who wrote poetry on lunch trays with his finger. I applied to art school in secret and told my parents over dinner, pushing the acceptance letter across the linen like a confession. You want to study photos, my father said, not cruel, so much as baffled, as if I had proposed moving to a planet where money never existed. That's a hobby. My mother smoothed her napkin and told me I was wasting my inheritance as if the inheritance were a natural resource I was polluting. I moved out 2 months later on scholarships and side gigs. Barista shifts at dawn shoots for local bands at midnight editing on a laptop with dead pixels like constellations that never moved. I wasn't chasing fame. I was trying to make something that was mine. The only person who ever asked about the work without an agenda was my grandfather. He wasn't sentimental. He didn't tell me I was meant for greatness. He just asked, taking pictures, and gave that small, real flicker of a smile I never saw anywhere else in the family. I visited him 3 weeks before he died, without calling first an almost unthinkable breach in the Harper schedule. He opened the door himself slower and thinner, but with eyes that missed nothing. We sat in his cedar and book study while he poured tea like a ritual and asked what I was working on. A series called Invisible Homes, I said. Abandoned buildings, neighborhoods being torn down. He listened for a long moment and asked what I was trying to say. That people matter even when the world forgets them. Dangerous work, he decided, because telling the truth always costs more than people think. When I stood to leave, he opened a drawer and placed a battered old film camera in my hands. The leather strap cracked the corners, silvered by time. Before I ever built a company, I carried this everywhere. He stared past me for a moment and then back. Some dreams don't survive the weight of inheritance, he said. Don't let them take your eye, Dana. I walked back into the cold with that camera pressed to my ribs like a promise. So on the morning, the family gathered for the reading of his will, sleek glass walls, marble floors, the kind of place where money speaks in a low voice. I wore my black dress from funerals and gallery openings and stayed quiet. My mother sat near the head of the table wearing a necklace that had belonged to her mother and the expression she reserved for donor galas. My father looked bored, in the way powerful men do when they already know the ending. Lucas gave me a nod that said we were related by paperwork. Mr. Whitaker, the family attorney, opened a thick file at exactly 10 o'clock a.m. and began distributing our grandfather's life in orderly parcels. a vacation home in Vermont, to an aunt investments to several cousins, an antique gun collection, to Lucas, a handwritten letter to my father, jewelry to my mother. When he finally glanced at me, he spoke without ceremony. To Dana Harper, he read, "Walter leaves the sum of $10. Laughter rippled like wind through wheat, soft, persistent, impossible to stop. I swallowed hard and kept my hands folded in my lap so nobody would see them tremble. I told myself it wasn't the money, but what it implied that I had been measured and found negligible. I was calculating how to stand up without my knees buckling when Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "There is a private addendum," he said, "meant only for Dana." The laughter died mid-breath. My father leaned forward, irritation replacing amusement. My mother's mouth tightened. I stood and followed Whitaker down a short hallway to a smaller office where the air felt still enough to cloud on breath. On the desk lay a thick cream envelope with my name in my grandfather's hand. The wax seal bore a tiny camera so precise, I laughed once, broken and grateful. Whitaker left me alone. My fingers shook as I opened the envelope and found several handwritten pages. "My dearest Dana," it began. He apologized for the theater of the $10 for the way it would land, then wrote that he needed them to show me who they were when they believed I had nothing. As the words unfolded, my chest tightened until I had to lay my palm flat on the paper to keep it from lifting. He had hidden the real inheritance from the public reading. I was the sole beneficiary of the Harper Creative Trust, controlling the philanthropic and creative arm of the family's wealth, along with ownership of a private gallery and a penthouse studio he had purchased quietly. 70% control, he wrote in his neat, unsentimental script, not as a trap, but as a key. They laughed Dana, but they laughed too soon. I read the letter 3 times before believing it, the words refusing to settle in my mind. He had left me not scraps, not pity, but the true heart of the empire assets no one else at that table even suspected existed. My grandfather had orchestrated it with the same precision he once used to build factories and boardrooms. Only this time his blueprint was rebellion. Along with the letter was a small black box. Inside lay a brass key on a leather cord with a note beneath Beacon Street top floor, "Your new studio, your real inheritance." I pressed the key into my palm until it left an imprint, trying to anchor myself. For years I had braced against the weight of being less, of being the afterthought. And here was proof I had been seen all along. My grandfather had collected my photographs, preserved them, framed them. Every image I had once sold anonymously for pennies had been waiting for me quietly catalogued under false names. It was not charity, it was recognition. He had not left me money to rescue me. He had left me the tools to build. When I returned to the main conference room, I kept my face unreadable. My father smirked. My mother leaned close to him with a whisper sharp enough to cut glass, and Lucas scrolled through his phone as though he'd already spent his inheritance in his head. "Everything all right?" he asked, more curious than concerned. "Just needed a moment," I said. They nodded dismissive and returned to their chatter. They had no idea the ground had shifted beneath them. The days that followed blurred between silence and strategy. I met privately with Mr. Whitaker, who laid out the structure of the Harper Creative Trust investments, holdings a gallery on Beacon Street he had secured in my name. We walked through the penthouse studio one gray afternoon. The space was wide and spare sunlight spilling through tall windows, the air faint with the scent of fresh paint. On the walls hung my photographs, each carefully labeled with dates and locations in my grandfather's hand. Pieces I had forgotten he had remembered. I walked from frame to frame like a ghost wandering through an alternate life. In that moment, I realized the $10 inheritance was not just humiliation, it was camouflage. He had drawn their attention away from me so I could inherit without interference. For weeks, I said nothing. My parents sent clipped messages that barely concealed their amusement. "Hope you framed the check," my father texted once. Lucas forwarded me an article about trust fund kids with a winking emoji. I ignored them. Instead, I studied the trust documents and drafted plans. The more I read my grandfather's words, the clearer his intention became. Use your eye, not their rules. The wealth was not a chain. It was a tool. 6 weeks later, invitations went out white cardstock embossed in silver. Harper Light Studio presents The Inheritance of Vision, a debut exhibition by Dana Harper. Minimal design, but impossible to ignore. I sent my family's invitations by certified mail. Lucas RSVP'd almost immediately, likely curious or calculating. My mother's response was vague. My father offered none at all, though I heard through Lucas they planned to attend. Ego, curiosity, maybe suspicion. Either way, I wanted them there. Opening night arrived. The studio glowed with soft light as guests drifted through wine glasses in hand, murmuring over the photographs. I had arranged the exhibition like a story beginning with raw, grainy images from my teenage years, moving through abandoned houses and alleys, ending with portraits of overlooked faces etched in stark black and white. The final room held only one object on a plinth, the $10 check framed and lit like a masterpiece. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Gifted to Dana Harper at the will reading of Walter H. Harper. Value priceless." Another line followed. "Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test." The timing was deliberate. As critics and donors whispered about the work, my parents entered pearls and tailored suits in place, followed closely by Lucas, with a faint smile tugging his mouth. They froze when they realized every wall bore my name. Lucas was the first to speak. "This is all you?" he asked, staring at a row of portraits. "Yes," I said simply. My mother tilted her head, voice careful. "Quite ambitious. Did someone sponsor this?" I shook my head. "Just one believer." My father's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get the money for all this?" "That's not the question you want to ask," I replied, calm but sharp enough to slice the air. Before they could respond, Mr. Whitaker appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand, a rare smile softening his granite features. He motioned to the platform near the plinth. The crowd hushed as he raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at Harper Light Studio, founded by and dedicated to the artistic vision of Dana Harper. Tonight, we also reveal a story few know. As executor of Walter Harper's estate, I announce that Dana Harper is the sole beneficiary of the Harper Creative Trust." Gasps, murmurs, camera flashes. My parents stiffened as if the air had turned solid around them. Lucas blinked, as though trying to rearrange the facts in his mind. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's smile collapsed. Whitaker lifted his glass. Mr. Harper believed legacy should follow merit, not lineage. Dana's pursuit of truth and vision, despite opposition, earned his full trust. To Dana, the real heir. The applause rose like thunder. But I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at them, my family pale and silent, in the glow of lights and cameras, confronted at last with a truth they couldn't laugh away. I stepped down from the platform, the applause still echoing. My mother was the first to recover her pearls, trembling against her collarbone as she whispered fiercely, "Why didn't you tell us?" I met her eyes evenly. "Because you never asked what I was building. You only asked why I didn't fall in line." Her lips thinned, a mixture of disbelief and wounded pride. My father, fists tightening at his sides, scanned the gallery as though searching for cracks in the walls. "This was all some plan, a setup," he muttered. I shook my head. "No, it was a mirror. You just didn't like what you saw." Lucas lingered, less angry than baffled. "You run this place," he asked, his voice teetering between admiration and envy. "Since always," I said, and left them standing amid the crowd, drowning in the sound of strangers' applause. That night, I stayed in the penthouse my grandfather had left me barefoot, on polished wood, the city glowing beyond the glass. I placed the $10 check on the desk beside a framed photograph I had taken years earlier of him staring out a train window. Alone in the quiet, I realized the inheritance wasn't money. It was freedom. He hadn't saved me from struggle. He had freed me to live on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly. The Harper Creative Trust wasn't just a vault of assets. It was potential. I met with advisors my grandfather had quietly lined up, learning how investments could balance profit with purpose. At the first board meeting, I wore black jeans and boots, not the polished armor of legacy. The trustees looked startled until I laid out a 3-year plan: grants for emerging artists, residencies, partnerships with community programs. My voice didn't shake, and by the end, they nodded in cautious respect. The empire was shifting, and for once it was bending toward creation rather than control. Meanwhile, my family went quiet. My parents' messages grew rare, then stopped altogether. Lucas didn't return to the gallery after opening night. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Some relationships are roots, I realized, but others are weights. I was lighter without them. The first residency artists moved in that spring, nervous, uncertain, carrying cameras, held together with tape sketchbooks full of raw visions. They reminded me of myself standing outside my grandfather's brownstone with nothing but a second-hand camera and stubborn hope. I gave them what I had once needed: space tools and the reminder that their voices mattered even if no one else believed it. One young woman knocked on my office door one evening, holding a battered camera in her hands. "Do you ever worry," she asked quietly, "that people will only see your money, not your work?" I smiled, recognizing the weight of her doubt. "All the time," I admitted, "but it only matters if you believe it. Lead with your vision, and the rest follows." Her shoulders eased, and I saw in her eyes the flicker my grandfather had once seen in mine. On the first anniversary of his death, Mr. Whitaker delivered a final envelope. Inside, a single page in my grandfather's steady hand: "Wealth is not what you hold, but what you choose to build. You were always the legacy I believed in, Dana. You just had to believe it too." I lit a candle in the gallery that night and left the doors unlocked. Strangers wandered in, students, tourists, neighbors. They paused in front of the $10 check, whispering, curious. They didn't know the whole story, and they didn't need to. Legacy didn't need explanation. It needed to be lived. Standing there in the dim glow, surrounded by the photographs I had once doubted anyone would ever see, I felt the truth settle. My inheritance wasn't a trust, a gallery, or a studio. It was the power to define myself and the responsibility to open doors for others who might otherwise remain invisible. So let them laugh that day in the boardroom. They laughed too soon. Because what I carried forward wasn't their judgment, but his faith and the quiet conviction that art, like truth, outlives laughter. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Leave a comment about what legacy means to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts.